Hi and welcome to the UB04 webinar. In this session, we cover UB04 or institutional charge entry, submission, and charge edit. But we'll begin first a video with how to set up UB04 patients. In this webinar, we're going to cover how to set up institutional cases for UB04 billing, which is in the first part of the webinar. That's what we're going to cover. This is actually an add-on video, and this video has to be watched in conjunction with the regular webinar. For a UB04 customer, all the other videos are still very much relevant and very much required, since the patient registration, scheduling, or any other billing activities like payment posting or collections efforts, those do not change. It is specifically just how the patient's case and entering the charge or editing the charge for an institutional billing customer that would be different from a professional charge entry or editing of a professional charge. The rest of the screens and billing processes remain exactly the same. So having said that, let's start with the agenda that we're going to cover. Today's part one of the UB04 webinar. So we'll start with the welcome, then we'll go through the UB04 or institutional patient training, and after that we'll have time for questions. So the things we're going to cover today, we're going to look at how you can add insurance. That's the UB04 or the institutional payer ID is different from the professional, so we're just going to look at that. How to add a patient for UB04 or an institutional billing, and how to set up institutional patient case, that is for the patient, how you can set up the case for that patient. And finally, we are also going to look at how you can have the cases automatically default as institutional type as opposed to defaulting as a professional type. So let's begin the training. So I'm already logged into the system, and firstly I'm going to show you how to set up an insurance for a for UB04 or with a UB04 payer ID. So to add an insurance or modify the insurance, the process is the same as we saw in the other webinar or as we have covered in the other webinars. But the difference here is only with the payer ID. Now, when you're adding an insurance from the system, you would be able to see whether the insurance is actually a UB04 insurance or whether it's a professional insurance. And I'm just going to demonstrate that to you. So let's go under Setup and click on Insurance/Plan. This is where you can search for insurances and you can add new insurance. So you've got the new insurance button on the top right hand side, which you can click on adding a new insurance. Now, if you want to search for an insurance, you can just type the insurance name and it shows up the insurance for you. Here, you may not be, or here when the list gets displayed, there is a field here which tells you whether the claim type is professional or institutional. And you can set up insurances to be either professional or institutional. Now, when you're adding a new insurance, I would always recommend that you add it using this additional payers. you can always hit the new insurance and add a new insurance um, from the blank insurance screen, which means that you would have to enter all the insurance or all the details. When you use the add additional payers option, it would bring you to the search claim payers screen. Now the benefit of using this is that firstly you get search, you can search by the claim type, which is professional or institutional, in addition to other fields that you have here. Now what this is that it's at when it brings up the screen, it gives you the ability to search the clearinghouse's payer list and add from the clearinghouse payer list. Now, in addition, you can also search by payer type. So if you're looking for a particular type of payer, you can also select the payer type from this drop down. Now, when you're searching a payer, so let's say I'm going to type in the payer name and I want to look for an institutional payer. I will just type the payer name, and here I will select the claim type as institutional. We'll hit search, and you can see that it shows me that payer, and it also has a claim type here as institutional. The other thing you'll also notice is any institutional payers will have the name with the name suffixed with UB. So this is just to make it easier for you to, if you're looking at a payer list or when you're trying to pick an insurance on maybe on the patient screen, it kind of makes it easier for you to know that this is actually an institutional payer. So let's say if this is a payer that I want to add to my list, to my insurance list, I can check this box and then hit the add selected payer. You can also do single selection, multiple selection, or you can do a select all. Now I'll hit the add selected payer, and that would add that payer to my list. So now if I just try the search once again here, to refresh the search, you can see that institutional payer has now been added. The most important thing here is that the payer ID for an institutional and a professional are different. So if you use a professional payer ID for an institutional claim, that claim will be rejected. So make sure to have to always use the correct payer ID. Now, one of the things here that was also covered or discussed in the other webinar where we showed the insurance setup is that the address is something that would have to be filled in always by yourself. So once you add the insurance, you can see that it actually defaults the address which is set up in your practice. What you want to do here, open that, and if you don't know the address, you can just leave it the same. But if you know the address, you want to update the institutional address, because that address is not stored in the clearinghouse payer repository, or the claim address is not stored in the clearinghouse payer repository. So you want to add that address or update the address on this field. So that would be just a step that you may have to do when you are setting up payers using this additional payer list. But as you can see, the rest of all the information has defaulted from that payer list. So you don't typically have to fill in anything else, just if the address needs to be changed, though the address is not very relevant for an electronic claim, and it sometimes may not even matter updating the address. But of course, if you at some point of time need to send a paper claim and you want the address to be printed at the header of the paper claim, it is always good to set up the address, the good address on the contact or the claim address field. So that was about setting up of the payer. Now next we're going to look at what is different that needs to be done for a patient. So I'm going to navigate to the patient and bring up the patient search screen. The setting up of the patient, adding a new patient, is the steps are all the same as we did for as we covered in the other webinars. So you want to click on the add new patient and complete all the patient's demographic information. So you want to complete all the patient's demographic information and add the new insurance here, hit the add new insurance to complete the patient's insurances. Now, the only difference that would be here, and of course one of the differences would be is that when you're adding the insurance, you would actually pick the payer, that patient and that institutional payer that is added into your list. That is the payer that you want to pick uh, for this patient. And as I mentioned a little before, that it's to make it easier for you, the pair name has a suffix of UB, so you can easily know that it's a UB type of pair. Also, when you are adding pairs or not, if you're not taking it from the clearinghouse list and you are adding the pair on your own, it would always be good to kind of suffix it with UB, especially if you build both professional and institutional claims out of the system, because then you'll have to have, and if you're like for one particular pair, if you're sending both professional and institutional, then it would be good to always uh, suffix them with whether it's a UB, or which is whether it's an institutional pair or it's a professional pair. So it becomes a little bit easier for you to look at and know this is a when you're trying to pick the insurance for the patient. Now in this video we're not going to go to the details of setting up of the patient because that's already covered in the other webinar. So we're going to I'm just going to go pull up a patient who has a who is added. So I'm going to just find a patient here. So you can see this patient has the primary and secondary insurance. Of course, this is the professional insurance that has been added for this patient, which means that if you go to the case screen, you would see that it is a professional case that has been added for this patient. So you can see this patient has the case, which is of professional type. The claim type is professional. Now, I'm going to add the institutional insurance for this patient. So I'm going to hit the add insurance, and I'm going to select the insurance that we just added. I'm going to pick that insurance, and we'll enter the subscriber number, relationship, and all the other information that is needed. It's coverage start date, and we'll hit save to have that insurance added. So that insurance has been added for this patient. So you can see this is a primary insurance. Now if you go to the case, you'd see there is a case that has been added for this patient because we added the primary insurance for this patient. The case got set up right here. The case got added, but you notice that the case that got added is still a professional type of case and not an institutional type of case. So what needs to be done here is this new case has to be changed to institutional. So we need to make sure we select institutional, and that is the default is professional. We need to change that to institutional. Now I'll hit the save, and that adds the institutional case for this patient. Now keep in mind, if you do not have an institutional case, this case will never come up on the UB04 screen for you to enter, so or to select. So only if you have a UB04 or the institutional type of case can you pick that case, or you can use pick that case and enter a bill for that patient from the UB04 charge entry screen. So we added this case for this patient. Now the case has got 3 tabs. The second tab here is UB04. This tab can be used for you to store patients' information, like you want to store their provider, you want to store any of their admission information or admit diagnosis code, type of bill, or any conditional or diagnosis codes. You can save them on this UB04. You can save this so that when you are picking this case, that is when you're entering at the time of charge entry, when you select this case, anything that you have saved on this case will automatically populate to the charge. So this is for saving the information, so they get auto-populated from the case to the charge. So when you pick that case, it'll just transfer and bring it down to the charge. So that's the UB04 case setup. Now, the reason why that there's a system here set up the case as professional when we added the payer, the system went ahead and created the claim type as professional. The reason why it did that is because the default case auto setup or the default auto case setup is set to professional instead of institutional. Now let's say if you do a mix of both professional and institutional, it would depend on which one do you do more that you want to set the auto case default to. If you do only institutional billing and don't do any professional billing from this system, then you can set it to institutional as the auto case setup. But if you do both, then whichever you do more, you may want to set that up as the auto case, because whenever you're adding an insurance, it's going to set up the case with, it's going to always set that claim type as default when the new case gets added. So where would you set that up? Where is the place that you can make that change of whether the cases have to be set up as institutional or professional, which is the auto cases. So let's close out of the screen and we'll now go to the setup menu on the left hand side. And under setup, I'm going to go to practice screen. In the practice screen, on the top right hand side, you have set practice options. So this is where you would have that option to set. So under the general tab, you can see there is a default case type, which has been set to professional. Now, if you would like to make it institutional, the default case type, so that every auto case that gets created when you add a primary insurance, it is always adding it as institutional. You can select this and change this to institutional and save it so that all new cases, when you add new insurances, they add as institutional type instead of the professional type. So that was about setting up of UB payer ID insurances, also entering patients or adding the UB04 insurance for a patient, and also setting up an institutional type of case.